You guys are not going to believe what I had to go through, and honestly, I'm still trying to process if I handled it the right way. I mean, can you imagine finding out that the person who's been making your life a living hell, the guy who's relentlessly targeted you, is also spewing the most vile, hateful garbage about everyone else behind their backs? And then having the power to expose every single one of his dark secrets to the entire school? Was I wrong for unleashing that kind of chaos? For essentially blowing up his world and maybe a few others in the process? Tell me seriously, would you have done the same thing? Okay, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Alex, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet kid, the one who prefers books and coding to parties and sports. I'm not going to lie, I'm a massive nerd and I'm proud of it. My world revolved around my computer, building intricate programs, and diving deep into the lore of my favorite fantasy novels. School was, for the most part, a necessary evil, a place where I had to endure before I could get back to my real passions. That was until Mark entered the picture. Mark wasn't just a bully, he was a force of nature, a hurricane of negativity directed straight at anyone he perceived as weaker or different. And I, unfortunately, fit both descriptions perfectly in his eyes. He was the star quarterback, the most popular guy in school, with a posse of equally obnoxious friends who echoed his every taunt. From tripping me in the hallways to accidentally spilling juice on my projects, to the constant barrage of verbal jabs about my clothes, my hobbies, my very existence, it was relentless. Every day was a tightrope walk, trying to become invisible, trying to avoid his radar. My friends, a small but fiercely loyal group of fellow outcasts, knew what I was going through, but there was little they could do. We were a minority against the popular crowd, and confronting Mark head-on felt like signing our own social death warrant. I tried ignoring him, I tried reasoning, I even tried telling a teacher once, which only resulted in him escalating his attacks, now with a smug sense of impunity because I tattled. It felt like there was no escape, no end in sight to the daily torment. To understand the depth of this, you have to understand the environment of Oakridge High. It was one of those schools where social hierarchy was everything. If you were on the football team, you were a god. If you were in the AV club, you were a ghost. Mark sat at the very top of that pyramid, and he used his position to ensure that no one ever felt truly safe. He had this way of making you feel like you were the problem, like your very presence was an inconvenience to his perfect day. I remember one time in 10th grade, I spent 3 weeks working on a robotic arm for the science fair. It was my pride and joy. Mark waited until the morning of the presentation, walked past my desk, and just leaned his entire weight on it until the servos snapped. He didn't even say anything. He just looked at me, smirked, and kept walking. That's the kind of person he was, calculated, cruel, and completely devoid of empathy. He didn't just want to tease. He wanted to destroy anything that made someone else feel special. I spent that entire afternoon in the bathroom, trying to glue the pieces back together, while he was outside in the quad getting high fives from the coaches. It was soul-crushing. My parents noticed I was becoming more withdrawn, but what could I tell them? That the guy everyone loved on Friday nights under the stadium lights was a monster during the week? They wouldn't understand the nuance of high school social politics. One particularly awful Tuesday, Mark decided to make a public spectacle of me during lunch. He snatched my lunch bag, threw my meticulously packed sandwich across the cafeteria, and then dumped my juice box over my head, all while his friends howled with laughter. I just stood there, dripping, humiliated, wishing the floor would swallow me whole. I could feel the sticky orange liquid seeping into my hair and down my neck, the coldness of it a sharp contrast to the burning heat in my cheeks. The entire room went silent for a second, then erupting into that awkward, cruel laughter that only teenagers can produce. That evening, I went home, threw my ruined clothes in the corner, and just stared at my computer screen. The rage was simmering, a feeling I rarely experienced. I was tired of being the victim, tired of feeling helpless. I just wanted it to stop. Later that night, I was deep into my coding, working on a complex network analysis project for fun, when an idea, a very dangerous, very alluring idea, sparked in my mind. Mark was always on his phone, always texting, always connected. He was so confident, so brazen, that it occurred to me he probably wasn't careful with his digital footprint. He was the type of guy who thought he was smarter than everyone else just because he was louder. I had learned a lot about network security and vulnerability exploits, and a thought began to solidify. What if I could find a way in? Not to do anything destructive, not to hack his grades or anything illegal, but just to see, to understand, to find some leverage, any leverage, to make him stop. It started as a theoretical exercise, a challenge to my skills. I began by looking for common vulnerabilities, trying to map out his online presence. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon an old, unsecured social media account he barely used, which had a recycled password. I remember sitting in the dark of my room, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my glasses, feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. One part of me said to turn back, that this was a violation of privacy. But the other part, the part that still smelled like spilled juice and heard the echoes of the cafeteria laughter, pushed me forward. From there, it was a domino effect. One weak link led to another, and before I knew it, I had access to some of his less guarded digital spaces. What I found initially was mostly mundane teenage boy stuff. Bragging about parties, complaining about homework, typical superficial popularity contests. But then I hit pay dirt. Or rather, I hit the abyss. I found a link to a private group chat, protected by a simple password that I quickly cracked. This wasn't just any group chat. It was the group chat, the inner sanctum of Mark and his cronies. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding. This felt wrong. Invasive. But the memory of the juice dripping down my face, the laughter, the constant fear, fueled my resolve. I clicked enter. The moment I gained access, I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach. It was worse than I could have imagined. The chat was a cesspool of negativity, a festering swamp of hate and bigotry. They weren't just making fun of me. They were tearing apart everyone. There were vile, misogynistic comments about the girls in our class, including girls Mark was currently dating or pretending to be friends with. They had a literal rating system for the female staff, using terms I won't even repeat here. They shared racist jokes directed at students of color, homophobic slurs aimed at our LGBTQ+ classmates, and utterly disgusting remarks about teachers' personal lives. No one was safe. They had nicknames for everyone, each one more cruel than the last. I saw screenshots of private messages from other students that they were mocking. Vulnerable moments where people had reached out for help or shared secrets, only to have them turned into punchlines for Mark's inner circle. They had detailed plans for pranks that went beyond harmless fun and bordered on malicious. I'm talking about things like Operation Homecoming, where they planned to ask a girl out just to stand her up and film her reaction for their own amusement. As I spent hours scrolling, my disgust only grew. I found a thread from last month where they talked about Mr. Henderson, our history teacher, who had recently lost his wife. They were making jokes about his grief, calling him weak, and planning ways to mess with his classroom materials to see if he'd finally crack. It was demonic. These weren't just kids being kids. This was a group of predators who took pleasure in the suffering of others. I also found evidence of them cheating on the SATs and distributing stolen answer keys for the final exams. They thought they were untouchable, gods among men in this small town. My own name came up, of course, with a particularly nasty string of insults that made the cafeteria incident seem tame in comparison. They had a thread dedicated entirely to the glitch, which was their nickname for me, where they tracked my movements and discussed how to break me further. They even posted photos of me they'd taken secretly, me reading in the library, me waiting for the bus, me walking home. It felt like I was being hunted. But it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us, the silent targets, the ones who had to endure their reign of terror. As I scrolled, I realized the sheer hypocrisy of it all. Mark was the guy who stood up at pep rallies and talked about school spirit and brotherhood, while in this chat, he was systematically dismantling the dignity of everyone around him. My initial goal was just to find something to make Mark leave me alone, but what I found was so much bigger, so much more toxic, that I felt a moral obligation to do something. I scrolled through weeks, months of messages, my fingers trembling as I copied and pasted, creating an extensive dossier of their cruelty. I captured every hateful comment, every derogatory remark, every plan for humiliation. I felt a cold anger solidify in my chest. This wasn't just bullying. This was systematic emotional abuse, carefully orchestrated and gleefully executed. The sheer audacity, the brazen confidence with which they wrote these things, thinking they were untouchable, made my blood boil. It confirmed every bad feeling I had ever had about Mark and his group. I realized that if I didn't do something, these people would go through life thinking this behavior was acceptable, moving from high school to college to the workplace, leaving a trail of broken people behind them. I spent the next 3 days in a sort of trance. I barely ate. I stayed up until 4 a.m. every night, documenting everything. I used a burner laptop I'd fixed up from spare parts to ensure my main PC couldn't be traced. I was careful, very careful. I encrypted the files and stored them on a hidden drive. I felt like a spy, but a spy with a very heavy heart. Every time I read a new message, I felt like I was losing a bit more faith in humanity. How could people be this mean? How could they look someone in the eye during the day and then say these things about them at night? So that's the situation I was in. And I had to make a choice. I had all this evidence, undeniable proof of their true characters, proof that would shatter their carefully constructed facades of popularity. I had thousands of messages, timestamps, and names. This wasn't just hearsay, it was their own words in black and white. I could simply delete the evidence and forget I ever saw it, burying the secret and allowing their cruelty to continue. I could try to blackmail Mark into leaving me alone, but I knew him. He'd just find a way to flip it on me. Or I could expose them, unleash the truth, and face whatever consequences came my way. I knew that by doing this, I was crossing a line. I was invading privacy to expose a lack of decency. I spent hours that night pacing my room, weighing the ethics of it. Was I becoming a monster to catch one? Or was I a whistleblower doing what the administration failed to do for years? Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have kept quiet? Or would you have dropped the bomb? The next day, I walked into school with a strange mix of fear and determination. My mind was made up. I spent the morning meticulously organizing the screenshots, creating a single, comprehensive document that laid bare every hateful message. I didn't just dump a folder of images, I curated it. I grouped the messages by category: the teacher section, the girls section, the racist slurs section. I wanted it to be organized chaos. I anonymized it, removing any trace of my involvement, ensuring it looked like an anonymous leak from someone within their own group. I wanted them to turn on each other, to wonder who among them had finally developed a conscience, or who had messed up. I wanted the truth to speak for itself, not for it to be dismissed as a personal vendetta from the nerd. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked into the school library during lunch. I knew exactly what I was going to do. The school's public computers had printers connected to them, and with a swift, almost surgical precision, I logged onto one, uploaded the document to a temporary cloud server, and then with a click sent it to print. Not just one copy but dozens. The sound of the printer was deafening in the quiet library. Chug-chug whir. Every page felt like a strike against the towers of their arrogance. As the printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page of incriminating evidence, I felt a rush of adrenaline. Each sheet was a fragment of their downfall. I had to time this perfectly. I waited until the 5-minute bell before the end of lunch, the time when the hallways are most crowded. I quickly gathered the stacks of paper, folded them discreetly, and then, as the bell rang for the end of lunch, I began my work. This was the most dangerous part. I had to be fast. I had a backpack full of truth, and I was going to distribute it like the morning news. With a shaky hand, I started tacking the pages onto every bulletin board, every locker door, every available surface in the main hallways. I even slipped a few into the faculty lounge under the door. I placed them in strategic locations where they would be impossible to miss. I watched from around corners as the first few students paused, their eyes widening as they read the damning words. Whispers started, then gasps, then outright shouts. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming. I saw people stop in their tracks, their faces draining of color as they recognized their own names in the targets list. It wasn't just a few people, it was half the school. The energy in the hallway shifted from the usual afternoon lethargy to a high-voltage tension. It was like a bomb had gone off, but instead of fire, it was truth. Within minutes, the hallways were buzzing. Students were huddled around the bulletin boards, reading in disbelief, pointing fingers, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and betrayal. The group chat messages, now public, revealed the true extent of Mark's and his friends' cruelty. The popular girls who had been mocked, the athletes who had been ridiculed, the quiet kids who had been targeted. Everyone was seeing the vile things that had been said about them. I saw Sarah, a girl who was always nice to everyone, break down in tears when she read what Mark had said about her family. I saw the captain of the soccer team, someone Mark called his brother, go red with rage when he saw a thread where Mark was laughing at his mental health struggles. The atmosphere in the school shifted dramatically. The initial shock quickly turned to outrage. The power Mark and his friends held, the fear they instilled, evaporated in an instant, replaced by a wave of collective anger. It wasn't long before Mark and his cronies started appearing in the hallways, drawn by the commotion. They walked in like they owned the place, laughing at some joke, until they saw the crowd. Their faces, usually so confident and sneering, paled as they realized what was happening. I watched from a distance, hidden in the crowd, as Mark himself approached a bulletin board. He was smiling at first, probably thinking it was some joke, but as he read the first few lines, the smile vanished. His jaw dropped, and a look of pure panic washed over his face. He tried to tear down the papers, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. People were already holding their phones up, recording him, taking photos of the pages, and uploading them to Instagram and Snapchat. The leak was viral before he could even finish tearing down the first page. The confrontation that followed was legendary. One of the guys Mark had insulted, a quiet but strong kid named Leo, didn't wait for the teachers. He walked right up to Mark and demanded an explanation. Mark tried to lie, tried to say it was just a joke, or that he'd been hacked, but the evidence was too specific. It had names, dates, and inside jokes that only he could have known. The crowd started closing in, not with violence, but with a wall of sheer disgust. For the first time in his life, Mark was small. He looked around for his friends, but even they were backing away, trying to distance themselves from him to save their own reputations. It was a complete and total collapse of his social structure. The principal and the school resource officer finally arrived, pushing through the crowd to see what the riot was about. When the principal read the pages, her face went from confused to absolutely livid. She didn't even send Mark to class. She walked him straight to the office. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. Classes were canceled as the administration tried to handle the fallout. The school felt like a crime scene. The aftermath was exactly as chaotic as I had anticipated, but also far more satisfying than I could have imagined. Teachers and administrators were scrambling, trying to understand the source of the leak, but the evidence was undeniable, and the outrage was too widespread to ignore. Mark and his friends were immediately called into the principal's office, followed shortly by their parents. The school launched a full investigation, and the sheer volume of hateful content meant they couldn't sweep it under the rug. The consequences for Mark and his group were severe. They faced long-term suspensions, were stripped of their positions in sports and clubs, and some of them were even forced to transfer schools due to the public outcry and parental complaints. The football team lost its star quarterback right before the playoffs, and for once, nobody cared about the game. They cared about the fact that their star was a monster. Their carefully constructed social empire crumbled, and they became pariahs overnight. The ripple effect was enormous. Friendships were shattered, reputations were ruined, and the entire social dynamic of the school underwent a radical transformation. Suddenly, the popular crowd wasn't so popular anymore. Kindness and respect, once overlooked, became valued. I never publicly admitted my involvement, and thankfully, no one ever directly linked it back to me. I was just another student who found the papers. I simply went back to my quiet life, but this time, without the constant fear of Mark's bullying. The air in the school felt lighter, safer. The silence from Mark was deafening, and it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Even months later, the impact is still felt. People are more careful about what they say, and there's a new sense of solidarity among the students who were targeted. We all shared this weird, traumatic, yet liberating event. The nerds and the outcasts aren't at the bottom anymore. We're just people, And the bullies are a cautionary tale. Mark eventually moved away, his family unable to handle the local shame. I heard he tried to join a team at his new school, but the screenshots followed him. In the digital age, your past is never truly gone. I feel a bit of guilt sometimes when I think about how his life was derailed, but then I remember the faces of the people he hurt, and that guilt vanishes. He chose to write those things. I just chose to let people read them. It wasn't me who ruined his life. It was his own words. But the story didn't just end with Mark leaving. The school implemented new anti-bullying measures that actually had teeth. They brought in speakers, but more importantly, they empowered students to speak up. The culture changed. I saw groups of kids who would never have spoken to each other before sitting together at lunch. The cool kids who weren't involved in the chat made a conscious effort to distance themselves from that toxic behavior. It was like the school had been purged of a poison. I even found myself being invited to things. People realized that the nerd they'd ignored was just a guy with his own interests, no different from them. I didn't become the new popular kid. I didn't want that, but I became respected. And that was all I ever really wanted. My friends and I could finally walk the halls without looking over our shoulders. We could sit in the cafeteria and actually enjoy our lunch. It's funny how a few pieces of paper can change everything. I think about that night sometimes, the night I decided to click print. It was the most terrifying and the most empowering moment of my life. I realized that power isn't about how many touchdowns you score or how many people follow you on social media. Power is about the truth, and having the courage to use it. Looking back, there's a part of me that still wonders if I went too far, if I caused too much collateral damage. But then I remember the years of torment, the humiliation, the sheer venom in those group chats, and I know I did what I had to do. Sometimes, when faced with overwhelming cruelty, the only way to fight back is to expose it, to shine a light on the darkness, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. This experience taught me that even the quietest among us can make a difference, that sometimes, a nerd with a keyboard can be more powerful than any bully. It's a strange feeling, knowing you changed the entire culture of a school from the shadows, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant standing up for what's right. Life is too short to let people like Mark dictate how you feel about yourself. If you're going through something similar, just know that you have more power than you think. You don't have to be a victim forever. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply letting the world see people for who they really are. Like this video if you were on my side, if you think I did the right thing by exposing those chats, and ending the reign of terror. Subscribe for more stories like this, where ordinary people face extraordinary situations, and take matters into their own hands to fix a broken system. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Was it a fair punishment, or did I go too far? Would you have had the guts to print those messages? Or would you have been too afraid of the fallout? Let's talk about it. I'll see you all in the next story.